You know something's gone wrong when a fairy tale leads to a meltdown on Instagram Live. It started quietly. Rachel Zegler hadn't posted in a few days. The Snow White backlash was already building, with critics dissecting every quote she made during press tours. But then it escalated, fast. Paparazzi showed up outside her New York apartment, shouting questions through the cold air. Rachel, do you regret taking the role? What do you have to say about the backlash? Why did they cut the dwarfs? You saw the shaky TMZ clips before you saw the live stream. Flashes, yelling, and Zegler keeping her head down. But later that night she went live. No makeup, no filter, just frustration leaking through every syllable. You want to ask me about Snow White? Fine, she said, voice tight, hands shaking slightly as she tried to keep it together. Let's talk about it, since apparently my front door isn't off limits anymore. And just like that, the meltdown began. But it wasn't loud at first, it was quiet anger, a smolder. She spoke about being harassed, about not feeling safe in her own home. And then, as the chat filled with questions, the tension cracked. She started venting, about the film, about the audience, about the legacy she's been accused of destroying. She called the original outdated, said she wasn't sorry for wanting a modern spin, and fired back at those who said she disrespected the story. I'm not here to make you comfortable, she snapped. I'm here to evolve the narrative. But you could tell, this wasn't confidence anymore. It was defensiveness, the kind that comes from feeling backed into a corner. This wasn't the Disney princess going live to promote her movie. This was a young star, tired, angry, overwhelmed, broadcasting a storm in real time. And the internet didn't miss a second. You remember when Rachel Zegler was being hailed as Disney's next leading lady? She had the voice, the poise, the momentum. Coming off West Side Story, the buzz was undeniable. She wasn't just seen as a fresh face, she was branded as the face to carry legacy titles into a new era. The Snow White remake was supposed to be her coronation, a live-action revival of a story everyone knew, now starring a bold, young actress ready to take the reins. But what happens when that golden girl decides to deconstruct the crown she's supposed to wear? In interview after interview, Zegler started distancing herself from the character she was cast to embody. She didn't just suggest that the original Snow White was dated, she said it loud and proud. She called the prince creepy, mocked the classic love story, and insisted that her version wouldn't be waiting around to be saved by a man. And while modern audiences might be open to updated takes, it wasn't just the what, it was the how. The delivery felt smug, the tone condescending. And you, the viewer, could feel the shift. Suddenly, people weren't just debating the film's creative direction, they were debating her. Was she ungrateful? Was she attacking the very fans Disney depended on? Was she trying to rewrite nostalgia instead of respect it? Then came the industry whispers. Box office poison, they said. And for a rising actress, that label doesn't just sting, it sticks. Executives, insiders, and former fans started rethinking everything. What once was a safe bet now looked like a liability. Rachel Zegler's candidness, once considered refreshing, had morphed into resistance. And what was supposed to be Disney's grand reintroduction of a beloved character was now looking like a slow-motion collapse, and it was only just beginning. So there you are, still processing the clips when more start popping up. Short, looped TikToks, screen recordings, reaction videos, all centered around that one Instagram Live, the meltdown. And suddenly it's not just a moment, it's a movement. You hear the edge in Rachel's voice. She's not just frustrated, she's furious. She's waving off criticism, rolling her eyes at the legacy of the original film, and doubling down on the belief that audiences simply don't get it. She claims people are clinging to outdated ideas, and she openly mocks the traditional love story as if it's beneath her. And you feel it. This isn't just someone defending their art. This is someone alienating the very people who might have rooted for her. At first, some tried to justify it. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe she was overwhelmed. But it didn't feel like a moment of vulnerability. It felt like a battle cry. One aimed at the fan base, at the critics, at the very foundation of the story that made Snow White iconic in the first place. The problem? That foundation wasn't just Disney's to reshape, it belonged to generations of fans. And by positioning herself against that nostalgia, Zegler wasn't ushering in a new era, she was torching the bridge between old and new. Industry insiders started to panic. Studio execs reportedly scrambled behind the scenes, unsure how to control the narrative. You could feel the PR machine falter. There was no polished statement, no team-issued apology, just raw clips circulating like wildfire, portraying a star spiraling in real time. And the worst part? Instead of recentering the film's message or rallying support, the meltdown became the message. It wasn't about Snow White anymore. It was about Zegler versus the world. And the world wasn't clapping. If you stepped back from the chaos, the clash was almost inevitable. On one side, you had Disney trying to modernize a beloved classic, a tale that had existed unchanged for nearly a century. On the other, you had generations of fans clutching to that nostalgia like a safety blanket. Then, standing in the middle of it all, was Rachel Zegler, trying to hold the torch of reinvention and unknowingly using it to set the bridge on fire. You watched as the culture war spilled into the comment sections. Progressives cheered Zegler's commitment to empowerment and updating the story for a modern audience. But even some of them began to shift uncomfortably when her tone crossed from bold to biting. And traditionalists? They were done, offended, furious. They didn't just feel like a story was being rewritten, they felt like it was being mocked. The romance? Gone. The dwarfs? Replaced or sidelined. The themes of kindness, love, and innocent hope? Criticized as naive and archaic. Even the visuals of the film couldn't save it because by then, the story felt like a ghost of itself, unrecognizable. And in the center of it all, that now infamous Instagram Live. You realize this wasn't just a PR blunder, it was a perfect storm. Creative missteps, aggressive messaging, and a lead actor so unapologetically critical of the original that it turned excitement into resentment. Suddenly, people weren't debating a film. They were defending their childhoods, their memories, their values. The remake was supposed to connect old and new, but instead, it drew a line in the sand. Zegler's meltdown didn't just hurt the movie's perception, it personified the very reason why audiences were rejecting it. This wasn't reinvention. To many, it felt like erasure. Now imagine you're part of the crew. You've poured months, maybe years, into this film. You've handled the lighting setups, the late-night shoots, the reshoots that no one wants to talk about. You've watched production costs balloon as executives scramble to fix scenes after poorly received test screenings. Everyone knows the pressure is mounting, but you're still holding on to hope. Maybe the visuals will win people over, maybe the music, maybe Rachel will win the audience back. And then the meltdown hits. Overnight, your hard work becomes background noise to a viral PR disaster. The film's lead actress isn't trending for her performance, her singing, or a heartwarming interview. She's trending for scorning the very story you were hired to help bring to life. Internally, the mood shifts. Reports leak about tensions behind the scenes. Some say the production team was blindsided by her outburst. Others quietly suggest the meltdown was the culmination of months of disconnect between the cast and the creative vision. Suddenly, you're no longer part of a Disney comeback story. You're part of a case study in what not to do when rebooting a classic. And for Rachel, the whispers begin to get louder. Studio heads start seeing her less as a rising star and more as a risk. One casting exec even refers to her, off the record, as radioactive. Not because of her talent, but because of her timing. Because when a movie's drowning, the last thing it needs is the lead actor throwing fire on the water. Her meltdown wasn't just a bad look, it was a spotlight on everything going wrong, a moment that exposed internal fractures, alienated allies, and left the studio scrambling to salvage anything from a ship that was sinking fast. This wasn't just a PR nightmare, it was a full-scale identity crisis. You've seen bad movies before. You've watched remakes that didn't quite land, but this felt different, not just because of the film, but because of the way you were talked to. When Rachel Zegler went live, it wasn't just her defending her vision. It felt like she was talking at the audience, not to them. And not with understanding, but with contempt. She rolled her eyes at critiques. She dismissed concerns over the dwarfs being removed. She laughed off the idea that a woman might still want a prince. And suddenly, anyone who found joy in the original was being painted as old-fashioned, or worse, part of the problem. And that's when it hit you. This wasn't about artistic differences anymore. It was about respect. The people watching that live weren't all conservative or stuck in the past. Many were just people who grew up with Snow White, people who watched it on VHS as kids, who dressed up as her on Halloween, who believed in fairy tales and magic and the idea that love could be innocent and true. Those weren't just outdated tropes to them, those were memories. So when Rachel laughed at those ideas, when she said the story needed to be fixed, it didn't come off as bold or progressive. It came off as smug, like she was too good for the story that made her famous in the first place. The backlash wasn't just about Snow White, it was about feeling talked down to. Fans didn't feel seen or heard, they felt belittled. And in that moment, whatever curiosity they had about the remake vanished. The nostalgia that Disney was trying to cash in on had been severed. Zegler didn't just alienate fans, she made them feel mocked. And audiences don't forget that. You know how some movies flop and just quietly disappear? Not this one. Snow White's failure wasn't just a poor box office story, it became the cautionary tale. And it wasn't because the CGI was off, or the plot was weak, or the pacing dragged. All of that may have been true, but none of it mattered once the meltdown happened. Because after that night on Instagram Live, Rachel Zegler became the movie. Every headline, every reaction video, every meme. It wasn't about the film anymore, it was about her, about the moment she turned a struggling project into a cultural wildfire, a single act of emotional defiance that echoed louder than a year's worth of trailers and press tours. And here's the kicker. The meltdown didn't just stain the film, it redefined it. People who had no plans to see the movie suddenly knew all about it, not because of the plot, but because of the drama, the disappointment, the disconnect. And while Disney may have wanted Snow White to be a bold reinvention, what the public saw was a franchise ripped from its roots, propped up by a star who didn't seem to want the role she was cast in. Worse, she seemed to resent it. And the industry took notes. Internally, executives began whispering about risk, about damage control, about what happens when your lead actor goes off script, way off script, right as you're trying to build momentum. Casting departments reevaluated criteria, PR teams became stricter, and future live-action remakes, suddenly a lot more cautious. Zegler may have believed she was championing change, but what the world saw was a rebellion that backfired. Her meltdown didn't just sink Snow White, it ensured that no one would ever look at it the same way again. What was once just a failed film became a Hollywood myth.